When starting a role-playing game, the first thing you should do is ask your first player what role-playing games he's played in the past. Has he played Dungeons and Dragons, 5th edition? Has he played Call of Cthulhu, RuneQuest, Bunnies and Burrows? Or the one that's closest to the way I like to play, the Final Fantasy. Final Fantasy, I think, Part 2, where they use percentages for skill systems and for combat, because that's what I use. And if they have played Dungeons and Dragons, DnD, then I'll say to them, yeah, I never liked it when a dragon with 1,000 hit points would be hit and crushed and stabbed and be on its last 5 hit points and still be as good at fighting back. And that's just not the way things work when you're in actual combat. Because I was involved in the Norse Film and Pageant Society, which was a precursor to modern day HEMA, where, yeah, I used the sword. And in order to defeat the person standing in front of me, I had to hit them with a metal part of my sword. I also had a spear, so the wooden part doesn't do anything. The metal part, and it has to hit them below the neck, although once I did get hit on the head, and it dented my helmet, which was a bit of a shock. Below the neck, above the waist. If you get hit, then you're out. And so I had a little bit of combat experience. And yeah, once you get hit by something with a piece of metal on it, even when it's not sharp, it hurts. And at that point, you're going to be going, ow, 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 my hand, rather than fighting just as you were a couple of minutes before when you got hit. So yes, every time you get hit, your ability to fight decreases. Unless, of course, you know, you've got full of adrenaline. You've gone berserk. But then that's for future rules when things get more complicated. So I ascertain if they're a experienced player or a newbie, a noob, someone new to it. And in many ways, noobs are easier, because if you've played advanced Dungeons and Dragons, you're going to ask me questions like, oh, what class can I be? What magic system can I use? And I have to explain to them I don't have a class system, because in the world in which I live, anyone can pick up a sword, a spear, a sling. You can learn to do all of these things. You can learn to cook. And so I don't restrict myself by having classes. And then they might ask, what race can I be? I'd like to, and I'll say, yes, but it's complicated. So let's first start off with what your profession would be. Because I like to start my players at age 19, when people start wanting to leave home. And so from the age 3 to 19, they have 16 years to learn things. And at least a third of their learning will be the profession of their father, which in a medieval type setting, most people follow. So I will ask my players, are you okay with a medieval setting? I'm not experienced with cyberpunk. I've played Call of Cthulhu, but I haven't run Call of Cthulhu. Mostly I use a medieval setting. A kind of Conan, Lord of the Rings world. No guns. And if they're okay with that, and most players will go, okay, that's great, I'm quite happy with that. And then I want to know what they want. What's their character in mind? What's the priorities? And if their first priority, the first thing they say is, oh, I want to be a halfling, then I'll say, great, we can fit a halfling in this world, but it is complicated. Because halflings, like in my world, like the other races, non-human races, are working in the mines, or in the case of this particular halfling that started in a campaign of mine recently, he's working in the kitchens of a castle. Because the other thing, when I asked him, what profession would you like to be? He said cook, which I was so pleased with. And it's become a very useful skill. So he spent, of his age 3 to age 19, so he's got 16 points, 16 years. He spent 5 of those years on my skill system, becoming a great cook. So he has a job, he has a background. I said, is it okay if you start in a castle? And he said yes, because that was the easiest fit with the way my world works. And so he's got a father and a mother, and he's a cook, and we discussed his father. He needs a name. So if you start in a campaign with me running the campaign, then yeah, your profession will be your father's profession. Your father needs a job and a name, and together we will sort out what his character is like. So it's a lot of dialogue. So I use role-playing to teach English, because there's lots and lots of talking involved. New words, and it's a game. A game with no limit to what words you can learn. If the person said, oh, I want to use an axe called a Francisca, then I would say, okay, that means you're a Frank then. And if they then say, yes, and I also want to use a longbow, and I'll say, no, that's not what the Franks did. Weapons were quite cultural. Everywhere in the medieval world, you'd have people with spears. Most people had spears. A little bit richer, and they had a spear and a shield. If they were noble, they'd have a noble weapon, like a sword. But the way my system works, a spear is longer than a sword, and so therefore they would get the first attack if 2 opponents were coming face on. Of course, if you're behind somebody, or jump out at them out of the bushes, then yes, you have an initiative over them. You will start to hit somebody with your fist before they get to stab them with their spear. Always assuming they didn't see you coming. I get my players to say what skills they would want, as well as their starting profession. So the person who started in a game with me recently wanted to be a cook, wanted to be a halfling. I said, what other skills would you have? And so we got other skills involved. And he spent those 16 points on them. Many skills start at a base level. Brewing, for instance, he went for, and that starts at 0, because by drinking beer, it is not possible for you to decide how beer is made. Whereas cooking, yes, intelligence and wisdom, and you can realize, yeah, you've got to heat up these ingredients. You have a start. And so many skills, even if my players have never asked for that skill. For instance, the player needed to climb, and so we looked up the skill base for climb. And of course, you need dexterity, the ability to move well. And strength is good. Whereas if you're going to cook, you need dexterity of fingers, so you don't chop your fingers off. Chopping very fast is a cooker's skill, and it needs dexterity, agility, acrobatics, climbing. And so already there are differences between my system and Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. Many skills are available. You can try to have a go at anything. Sailing a boat, you've never been in a boat, you haven't seen the sea before. But with intelligence and wisdom, you have a chance of doing the most rudimentary, easiest tasks. The hardest tasks, no chance at all. And so I discuss these things, get the player sorted, and start the game. On an ordinary day, I ask him, what would you do first thing in the morning? What would you do lunchtime? What would you do evenings? A conversation with the father, and perhaps with the noble in the castle. And then I start the game going by saying, the noble has asked for you to go to the fishing village, which you've been to many times, and get some fish, because we're out of fresh fish. And also while you're there, can you do some hunting to get venison? And this idea came from the fact that the player said, my father is good at hunting. And I said, are you good at hunting? And he said, no. And so this became a friction between father and son. And it became role-playing. I would play the father and put on my frown face for the father and my gruff voice. And we would converse. We would talk as if father to son. I would roll dice to see how the journey went. So I don't have a plan as to what can happen in my games, as you would get with some booklet outlining a dungeon. I have things that are possible. I have thoughts of the interesting people that would be there around. A world-changing event that will trickle down so that the player will eventually be involved in these events. And it was a trade crisis. Yeah, the flint, the coloured flint, the trade had stopped. I decided. What was the consequences of this? What would the traders be doing? What would the people that relied on this flint be doing as a consequence? And so everybody in my world has a motive. The father, his motive, he was so pleased when the son managed to down and hunt a deer. Although the son my player had thought it through and thought, oh, I can organize it this way. And so much as he didn't have the skills, he got someone else to hunt the deer and make it look like he had hunted the deer. And so the father was proud of his son. First blood. And so we role-played this. And I rolled a dice to see if the father had suspicions, noticed that something was not quite right about what had happened. But no, the father completely believed. So, if stationary at night in the wilderness, I will roll a d20 twice. The first half of the night, the second half of the night. If I roll a 20, then something bad has happened. And there will be consequences. And I'll roll the dice again. When you roll a maximum, 20 on a d20, or a minimum, 1, you roll it again, the dice explodes. And so, I roll a 20, something bad will happen in the first half of the night. And now I have to use my imagination to think, what is the bad thing that happened? What is possible in this area, in this circumstance? If they're sleeping in an inn, a longhouse, inside a fortified village, a peaceful area, then nothing happens. I don't have to roll the d20. During the day, if they're in one place, I will roll the d20 twice. Particularly bad, particularly good things, and then I would use my imagination to come up with what those bad or good things are. If you're moving along, traveling, then there's many more chances for bad and good things. So I roll a d20 4 times for each day. Asking the player, what will you do for the first few hours? What will you do for lunchtime? How will you set up your camp? And so together we are creating a story and making the dialogue of that story. Another thing I like to do, which I saw one of my favorite DMs do, he started with a blank piece of paper and said, right, okay, this place is like this. We'll draw it. So I said to my player, there's the coastline. The fishing village is made of round houses with daub and wattle. And I said, do you know daub and wattle? And he said no. So I said, okay. So daub and wattle is wooden pieces, mostly willow, bendable hazel. And the daub is mud pushed in between the wood. And that's how you make your walls. That's how you make your roof. And so this village was a daub and wattle, and it would be all circles. And so I invited my players to draw the village. We need at least 30 houses, some of which will be particular places. This will be the merchants. I'll put an M. This is the longhouse. It will be longer than the others. What else do we need? Who else do we need in this village, this fishing village? And so together we invented the map and the story. And each time, if he makes a skill roll, his skill gets better. And so, yes, he started to climb. And much as he was terrible climbing, because he succeeded, he got a tally and had a chance to increase his skill. Anything else I need to say? Oh yeah, caves. If you're going to have caves, put fungi in them. I don't like torches. A flaming torch, which is used a lot in Hollywood, they last between 20 minutes to an hour if they're really nicely made. I know, because I was in the Norse Film and Pageant Society. I had a torch. About an hour later, it goes out. So Hollywood is just wrong about this. Candles is mostly what people used to light dark places, and they were smoky and horrible and cost money. So cave systems, if I need them to be lit, then I have a fungus growing on the wall that glows. And this is not too outrageous, because there are glowworms in caves in New Zealand. I've seen them. Yeah, and what's the cave system used for? I don't like dungeons with random monsters here and there and no source of food or water or no organisation between who's in this room and who's in that room. I don't like a chaotic dungeon. So I use them as army generation. They're a good place to build up a good army. Just like in The Lord of the Rings, Saruman, he got his army of orcs together, an Uruk-hai, from in the caves that were underneath Minas Tirith. Fungus, not torches. And I changed the building type to give character to the land. As the characters move from one place to another, the type of building will change. There's wonderful buildings in Arborabello in Italy, where they're all made from slate, they're all circles, and they have pointed, cone-shaped roofs. And I mix my eras, so I'll also have large pieces of wood with small pieces between and covered in plaster. Houses which you can still see, medieval houses you can still see in England. They were a later medieval period, but the world encompasses many. I start them in a village to have small amounts of prior knowledge, so then they can go and find the world. I can make it up as they go along. I can bring it out of my imagination using books and films that I've seen. And yeah, so the world is very complicated. Everyone you meet will have a backstory and an aim in life. Are they protecting their village? Do they want to leave their village? Are they earning money? Do they just want to get drunk? So people that the characters meet, that the players meet as they go along in the world, they will have incentives and a journey in life as well. I also give my the people they meet, just like the father will frown. I have a merchant. I mean, you can only have one merchant that does this, but he starts a conversation, what would you like to buy? And then he stings into a smile. And he keeps on a kind of jolly but stuck-on smile. He's my character that will ping into a smile after a sentence and a half of talking to the characters. And so I act with different voices and different mannerisms and a different amount of words. Some of my characters can speak lots and lots of different words, others much less. So, Roleplaying 101, I call my homebrew Gnarly Fantasy, and yeah, I have been working on it for some time. I have 3 different types of character sheet. The starter character sheet with just a few skill spaces and a diary to be kept. If the players keep a diary, it's much easier for the players and for me, the DM, the GM, to remember the names of the people they've met, the villages they've gone to build the story.